Hello, I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily update for September 17th, 2021. I can't really say good morning to you today because it's not morning. I'm a little late. I had some dental surgery this morning, and as you might be able to tell, it's kind of hard to talk when you're on Novocaine. So I'm sorry I had to do this a little late, but there's some important developments I want to get to, and I'll have to be a little bit short with the questions. There are many really good questions, but I just won't be able to get to them because I want to get this update up today so that people can get a sense of what's going on, because there's so much occurring that's quite crazy. Let's start with this new security partnership that was announced yesterday. The U.S. and the United Kingdom are doing a nuclear submarine deal with Australia as part of a new strategic partnership, which they call the AUKUS, or AUKUS, I think is what it's called. Biden, Boris Johnson, and Scott Morrison announced this. It's a very big deal. I mean, the United States has not shared nuclear sub technology with anyone except the British. And now they're bringing in the Australians. But look, Australia has no surplus of nuclear engineers and nuclear technology. They're not going to be able to service this. As the opposition leader in Australia said, this will make Australia more dependent than ever on the United States and, of course, the British. The fact that these are 3 of the 5 I countries is also worth noting. But in their announcement of this, they said this is not aimed at any other country. Well, anyone who knows anything knows that's a load of crap. This is aimed at China. The Chinese know it. The Europeans know it. And the idea that this occurred the same day that there was a discussion set up for the Quad, which is Japan, India, Australia, and the United States, which is another anti-China alliance, makes it clear that what we had thought was the case appears to be the case with Biden, that the pullout of Afghanistan, while strategically important and necessary, may have been nothing more than a precondition for a shift, or the so-called Asia pivot, to take on the containment of China as the centerpiece of U.S. military strategy. And if it is, it's a disaster, a catastrophe, and on top of that, it's seriously damaging what little relationship remains between the United States and continental Europe. In making this deal with Australia, a French deal which is a $100 billion deal in which the French were going to provide a number of diesel-powered submarines to Australia, it was canceled. The deal was set to be signed later this month. The French are infuriated, but so are the Europeans as a whole, because they once again were not informed of a serious strategic shift in U.S. policy before it happened. The French Foreign Minister Le Drian, said he's expressed his total incomprehension about this. And he said it's a stab in the back. The Chinese said it's highly irresponsible, and that rather than increasing stability, which is what Biden and Boris Johnson said, this decreases stability. Helga Zepp-LaRouche described this as a mindless extension of the endless war policy. So if that's the case, what we're looking at is the Indo-Pacific region being put into play, in which the tension between the United States and China has been increasing. Now, there's a counterpole to this, and that is Afghanistan. What's clear is the United States and NATO, which made a total chaotic mess out of Afghanistan, on top of what had been done by the Soviet invasion and the Taliban government. They left it in a completely destroyed state, a humanitarian crisis. Well, the neighbors of Afghanistan are trying to do something about it. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization is meeting today and tomorrow. They're pledging transportation corridors, electricity development, water development. They need some funds for it. And one of the interesting comments at this meeting was from Imran Khan, the Prime Minister of Pakistan, who said that we have to leave geopolitics behind and go to geoeconomics. Well, his comment about breaking with geopolitics is exactly what the Schiller Institute's Helga Zepp-LaRouche has been saying is the key to establishing an era of peace and development. So while much of the world is moving in that direction, recognizing that what benefit is there to leave Afghanistan as a failed nation? There'll be a civil war. There'll be terrorism as it becomes a safe haven for terrorists. It will continue to be the world's leading heroin producer. Who benefits from that? That's why other countries are calling on the United States and the NATO countries to participate in rebuilding or building Afghanistan, as opposed to leaving it in the dilapidated shape that was the result of 40 years of warfare. Now, the other thing I want to comment on, and this does get to some of your questions. I had a number of questions, for example, on what we reported yesterday about the Woodward and Costa book, Peril, which included a whole section about General Milley, the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, talking about his calls to China to tell them that the United States is not going to go to war with them and that he will let them know if something bad will happen, if there's going to be a war. Now, on the surface, since he didn't do that, he didn't commit a treasonous act. But as one very well-informed military law expert said, he should be forced to resign because he announced that he would do something like that. He intended to do that. But then there's the question, is it really so bad to have military discussions underway? And this is something that General John Hyten, who's the vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, said in his speech at Brookings last week. He said that we have to have a policy of no war with Russia and China, and that means military-to-military discussions. So the question that several people asked is, wasn't Milley merely saying he's trying to prevent a war? But then another question was, isn't his real crime his efforts to sabotage the effort by Trump and Biden to end the endless wars? Well, this brings up the incoherence of U.S. policy. Are we really intending to end the endless wars? If so, why this new partnership with Australia and England to create a battlefield nuclear submarine contingent designed to take on the Chinese Navy? If we really intend to end these endless wars, why are we still in Syria? Why are we still in Iraq? Why are we still all over Africa? Why do we have an $800 billion a year defense budget? Now, is it possible that this could have been a back channel to be set up to China, what Milley was talking about? Well, if it was, it should have been in consultation with the president. You don't do these things behind the back of the president. That's the potential problem. And we're going to be looking into this more closely. We're talking to contacts and sources to see what we can put together on this. But what it really does show is the incoherence of U.S. policy that goes back to the George W. Bush war policy, the Obama war policy. That while President Trump said a number of things that were important about ending these wars and about cooperation with Russia and China, at the same time, he increased the sanctions against Russia and China. He went along with the British false flags against the Assad government and the warnings that he made repeatedly about the so-called China flu and China unleashing a deadly pandemic against the world. This is not the kind of dialogue that you want to have. So what we have at this moment is an opportunity to once again use the Afghan situation not as a pivot to new wars, new containment, new confrontations, but as a showcase for the kind of economic development that's possible, cooperation. The neighbors of Afghanistan are committed to that. There are people in Russia and China completely committed to that. There was an event called the Kandahar Dialogue that occurred in Pakistan yesterday, which brought together people from Russia, China, representatives from the Schiller Institute, Hussein Askari and Helga Zeppler-Roush. And what were they discussing? Mutual economic development. So this is the real pivot. Pivot away from geopolitics to cooperation. And that's what's needed if we're going to avoid a war, which is the only ultimate result of the incoherence in the policy reflected by this new strategic partnership between the U.S., the U.K., and Australia. One final note on that. Last week, much of the world's media was talking about the early demise of so-called global Britain, that the British, as a result of the U.S. pullout from Afghanistan, were left in the cold. There's no longer a special relationship. So what do the British do? They pull themselves right back in. And that's what this new Australia deal represents. An attempt by the British to maintain the dominant force in the so-called special relationship. Getting rid of geopolitics means ending the U.S.-British special relationship. Thanks for joining me. Have a good weekend. Do some thinking, some reflection. Send me your questions. I'll take them up during the next week since we didn't really have a chance to take them up today. So thanks for joining me, and I'll see you then.